Well, last time we ended with this map, and I showed you this map. We talked about the rise of Islam and how it spread throughout the Middle East, what most people call the Middle East, right? Certainly Arabia, and we're going to see now from the Arabian Peninsula, they will quite quickly after the death of Muhammad spread across. Sasanian Empire will fall, the Byzantine Empire will lose a lot of its territory, especially here in North Africa and all the way over to Spain. Yes?
How did Mecca become such a big place? Was it where it's positioned?
Well, part of it is its geographic position. Almost everyone who lives in the Arabian Peninsula lives along the coast. And so the position of it, it's a good harbor, and it's where the mountains have a break in it. There's a pass. So yeah, the geographic area is why it originally became a place. And then, of course, it became a place for trade. Then it also became a place for tribal religion and a shrine. So let's move forward, and perhaps some of those questions will be answered. Muhammad, let's talk about Muhammad. Much of Islam then can be related, of course, back to Muhammad, at least the early beginnings of it. He's the founder of this religion. He is the prophet, as he is called, the prophet. And how does his life then begin? Well, his life begins with his father dying, I think even before he's born, but certainly then his mother dies, I think, when he's about the age of 6. So he has a life that is somewhat unusual for the Arab world. Remember, as you're reading that book by Nidal, it emphasizes how important family is in the Arab world, right? Hopefully you've picked up on that. Family is the most important thing. So when you meet someone or you begin to be friends with someone and you talk to someone, one of the first things that's going to happen is they're going to ask you about your family. Actually, some of the questions they ask you will seem very personal, things that we would not ask. You know, like, how many children do you have? How much money do you make? Is your father still alive? How much money does he make? What kind of job does he have? They want to know everything about what we might sometimes consider to be rather personal stuff, especially about your family. Well, Muhammad now does not have his sort of regular family, right? His father has died. He's very young. His mother has died when he's 6. So within the ancient world and the world that even here of the Arab world, being an orphan, and I think still today, being an orphan makes you very vulnerable. Right? We read in the Bible, especially the book of James, if you want to know what pure religion is, it's helping orphans, right? Orphans and widows. Why? Because an orphan and a widow typically can't give you anything. You see, you might want to help somebody if you think, well, me helping that person is going to help me in the long run. You see some guy that, maybe think he's got some money or he's got some power, he's got some influence, he's got some friends, and he needs some help. So you say, well, I'll go help that guy. But sort of implied is, down the road, when I need help now, I'm going to be calling upon you. One day, and that day may never come, I'll ask you for a favor. Now, you know what movie that's from? Well, probably not. Godfather. You come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding, and you ask this of me. Someday, and that day may never come. See, I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to do you a favor. But I'm going to expect a favor in the future. Now, if you do this for an orphan or a widow, there's not much, the orphan does not have contacts. The orphan does not have money. The orphan does not have clout. The orphan does not have family. And that's typically the way the favors are carried out. So, Muhammad is in that situation. He is an orphan. He is sent off to live, or has the influence anyway at first of his grandfather, as you might expect, and then of his uncle. He stays with an uncle. His uncle's kind of tough on him, I think most people would say, and in fact thinks the boy needs to be toughened up, so he sends him off to live with the Bedouin for a while. And the Bedouin, of course, they had a harder life, so he wanted to show him the harder life. Consequently, that meant Muhammad felt an affinity with the Bedouin and for the kind of life that was lived out in that way. And of course, that'll come into play later on when he will have many Bedouin accept his message. Well, then Muhammad does something that, of course, I always recommend to people, but they usually don't take me up on it. And that is, he got money the old-fashioned way. He married it. Okay? You want to be rich? I'll give you the easiest way. Marry someone who's rich. Or be born to someone who's rich. Those are the two easiest ways to get wealth. All right? So I'm not being too cynical, but you can learn to love someone. Love is a decision, I'm told. So why not decide to love someone with money? Well, I don't know. I guess no need to take dating and marital advice from me, but I'm throwing it out there. A lot of people fight about money. Now, I'm not saying if you got a lot of money you won't fight about it, but I think it would alleviate many problems. Well, anyway, that's what Muhammad did. So he went from being a worker in the caravan to being the boss, basically, when he married the boss. Well, the boss, she widowed, she had sort of inherited. This was something that they had in Arab culture, that women did inherit money and business and property and that sort of thing. And so when she married him, then he became basically a man of a lot more leisure than he had been. So this gave him time to think about things, and he would go up into the mountains nearby Mecca and meditate. Had a lot of questions about religious things and other things in life. Of course, working on a caravan, you do run into people. You meet a lot of people. He met Jewish people. He met Christian people. And at any rate, this is all starts around the age of 40 for him. Okay, so this would have been around 610. And that's when he begins to say, anyway, he records, he testifies that he received visions and messages from God, brought to him via an angel, probably a guy you've heard of. His name is Gabriel. The angel Gabriel, he said, came to him and said, basically, Muhammad, you have been, God hears what your concerns, and he has chosen you to be his messenger. Yeah.
So up to this point, would you have been adhering to the polytheistic kind of beliefs of Israel?
Well, this is part of what he was questioning. Yeah. So you're asking about polytheism. This is what everybody was a polytheist, but he was questioning that polytheism and a division, and how all these different tribes had different gods, which God was true, and this sort of thing. And so basically, Gabriel, he says, comes to him and says, this is the true God. Allah is the true God. There's no other God but Allah. These idols these stones are pagan, they're wrong. You need to worship the one true God. And on top of that, it's your job, your message is to take that message of monotheism to your people. Go down into Mecca and tell them what they're doing is wrong. People don't usually like to hear that what they're doing is wrong, and his message was not that well received in Mecca. Because the political structure, the religious structure, the family, the tribal structure, none of it liked that message. Because it's going to take massive changes. So Muhammad began to preach against polytheism in Mecca. Here's an image, a drawing somebody made long ago of Muhammad. You may have heard of controversy over images of Muhammad, and that is true. Typically within Islam, they never portray Muhammad. If they do show Muhammad sometimes, first of all, within the Islamic faith, images of anyone or any animal or anything are forbidden. Now, sometimes people have broken that rule, as people tend to do, but then they usually don't show Muhammad's face if they do kind of show him. So part of the controversy that maybe you've heard of, some people got some people very angry by making cartoons and things of Muhammad, usually cartoons that were not flattering. I'll just leave it at that. It's controversial. But this drawing was made a long time ago, and it's basically trying to show Muhammad or depict Muhammad preaching in Mecca. There's one problem with it, besides the fact that probably some Muslims don't want to show Muhammad at all, or any person. They're very strict. The other thing that's problematic is that he's holding a book. In his left hand, he's holding a book. Which, of course, would be quite common if you were depicting, say, a preacher within Christianity, right? You often hold the Bible. Now, these days, people don't use the Bible much, right? They just have an app. Or what I found out at most hipster churches is there's no pulpit, there's no Bible, there's just a PowerPoint. Maybe an Apple computer up on a little table, right? So, that's okay. And no tie, no suit. You don't want that kind of stuff. No, come on. You got to wear like blue jeans and, dress shirt maybe a dress shirt if you want to be cross-cultural, but you should just wear like a t-shirt or something. A hipster t-shirt with an ironic phrase on it, like, I don't know, what would they put on there? Coffee. Coffee is my drug of choice. How's that? Ooh, I think I could probably sell that one.
Probably good.
Even though I don't drink coffee, but I think that one was selling. And I would put like a mug on there with steam coming up off of the cup. Instead of a mug, though, I'd have to get like a Starbucks cup, but it couldn't say Starbucks, so I'd get sued. Okay, now we got it. Well, they put Muhammad here. I don't know how you got me off on these things. You guys are always leading me down
No one even said anything.
a path. Nobody even said anything? No. So you're trying to say I'm to blame? No, that's not allowed. Well, anyway, he's holding the book. Why is that problematic? Muhammad. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, you got it.
They didn't start recording until generation after, right?
Well, yeah,
Or is it successor after?
yeah, not too far after. That's one thing. This is supposed to be a Quran. The Quran is not written down like this or in a book form for probably another 40 years or something.
Well, could it be any book?
What's that?
But could it be any book?
Yeah, it could be. But here's the other problem. Muhammad couldn't read.
Okay.
That's the problem. Who cares?
Muhammad can't read or write. Now you might find that Well, why am I telling you that? Well, that's exactly what Muslims will tell you. They're quite adamant that Muhammad could not read and write. Why do you think that would be? Why would they want the founder of their religion and the great prophet to make sure you knew he couldn't read or write? Yeah.
Maybe to kind of like reinforce that this was truly a vision and it's not like you read it or like saw it somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Yes, you're right. This reinforces the idea that this is not coming from any other source. Muhammad couldn't have read the Bible, right? Couldn't have read the Hebrew scriptures. He couldn't have read the New Testament. He couldn't have read anything else that would have influenced, put these ideas in his mind. So where does it come from? It comes from the angel Gabriel, from God to the angel Gabriel to Muhammad and now to us. It's a direct message, the Word of God. Okay? And not influenced by anything else. So if you read something in there, and you will, when you read something in there, you'll read things that sound familiar to the Bible. And you'll say, oh, well, Muhammad must have been reading the Bible. No, he wasn't reading the Bible. He was illiterate, could not read or write. So I remember when I first heard it, I thought, well, that's kind of, why do they want to make sure I know that? Well, that's why. That's why, I think. Well, certainly Muhammad had contact with Christians and Jews as he was a caravan, worked on the caravans and with the trade. And certainly there are many Christian and Jewish ideas in the Quran. I put both spellings up here. The one that's used most now is with a Q, although in older writings you'll find it with a K, Quran, instead of Quran. It's just trying to transliterate the Arabic word. So how did those Christian and Jewish ideas get into the Quran? Well, the skeptic, maybe like somebody like me, might say that it came that way because he read the Bible, he heard stories from the Bible, and he just sort of put this stuff together in a slightly different way. Of course, what the Muslim would tell you is no, the reason that there's commonality here is that it comes from a common source. The God of Abraham, the God of the Jews, the God of the Christians is the God of the Muslim. It's the God of Abraham. Well, they call him Ibrahim, but same guy, right? So, why are there common threads? Well, you would expect there to be common themes. Why? Because it's coming from a common source. All right, there you go. So, let's move on. I could keep going on, of course. Let's talk about the Quran. Just briefly. Here is a picture of a Quran. They can be all different sizes, different bindings. I remember being in a museum. I saw where they would write, somebody had written, I think I've seen this more than once in more than one museum, but they'd written the entire Quran on an ostrich egg shell. They'd started at the top, spiral, 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 all the way around. Tiny, tiny, had a magnifying glass there so you could see the letters, all the way around to the bottom of this egg. So an ostrich egg is it's the entire Quran.
How big is the Quran?
Quran's about the size of the New Testament.
Less impressive.
That's still a lot.
What is that?
Or sometimes they'll write it in, like very tiny form. Sometimes they'll write it in with a letter. See these here? They have stuff around the writing, sort of decorations and things. What's that?
What does it mean? Sorry. Like people of the book?
Oh, people of the book. Well, in the Quran, Christians and Jews are described there as people of the book. Now, what does that mean? That's the question on the table, right? Book in Arabic is called kitab. So the people of the kitab, book. What they mean by that is that what do you think they mean by that? I'll ask you first. I don't ask enough questions, so instead of giving the answers, I'll ask the questions. What do you think? What book are they talking about if they're people of the book? Well, yeah, no, not the Hadith, because that's an Islamic book, and these are Christians and Jews. The Bible, the Torah, the Jewish scriptures, the New Testament.
The Talmud?
Yeah, well, exactly, Talmud. These are the things they're talking about, especially the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament, the Old Testament, the New Testament, we would call it. Why? Because God has revealed himself to these people. The Jews had prophets. The Christians had prophets. The Muslims have a prophet. And the source, the God, the source of that prophecy is the same God. Now, that's kind of a double thing there, right? On the one hand, it says, well, Christians and Jews are special because God revealed his message to them, so they're not like the pagans. They're not like the Hindus or the Buddhists or something like that. They have been chosen by God. They were chosen by God to receive prophets and messages and revelation. But the flip side to that is, the more you know, the more you have received, the more you are responsible. Right? So in other words, if, for example, we show up somewhere, let's say in a foreign country or whatever, and we start doing things and what we're doing is wrong. We don't know it's wrong. Why? Nobody told us it was wrong. So, while still what we did was unacceptable and wrong, the idea is we were unaware, right? But if you're a Christian or a Jew, you have received the message. You do know what is right and wrong, and you're still doing what's wrong. So in other words, you don't really have an excuse. Does that make sense? So the Christian and the Jew are people of the book. That means they've been chosen by God. That's special. But it also means they're held to a higher standard than, say, a Hindu or a Buddhist, who are just pure pagans. They don't know. They never received a revelation from God. They don't know what's going on. We're going to have to start from scratch with those people, right? But the Christian and the Jew, and in some sense, it can be harder, well, if you try to deal with someone who has had some background. Let's say if you're in a church and you meet somebody who grew up in the church and then they left the church. They're often harder to deal with than someone who has never been a part of the church. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is the idea. Now I put that there just to show, just to point out these things. Now the second thing is, the Quran then is a collection of these visions, these revelations, these messages that Muhammad said he received from the angel Gabriel. Not written by Muhammad. He never wrote it down, but it was written down by his followers at the time. So there are things that are being written down pretty much right at the time by his followers, scribes we could call them, who basically decide, hey, we better start writing these things down. And they do. They're not codified, they're not, sort of collected until probably another 50 years. They'll kind of be collected. Okay, so remember, Muhammad doesn't read or write. So he did. So if somebody asks you, Muhammad wrote the Quran. Technically, no. Yes?
Is it still revered as sacred and holy, even though it was almost like a second-hand kind of understanding of what you said?
Is the Quran revered? Yes, it's revered.
Or it's inspired word, and it's he gave people stuff and they wrote stuff down. But does this have as much weight since people know that he didn't actually write anything down?
Oh.
More kind of the hearsay of what he said.
Well, do the words of Jesus, he didn't write anything down.
Right.
I don't think anybody says he was illiterate, but he didn't write anything down. But the words of Jesus hold more weight than the words of, in a lot of people's mind, anyone else. Right? So yes, the idea here is that God sent a revelation, Muhammad proclaimed it, other people wrote down that proclamation. In fact, a Muslim would argue with a Christian that the Quran is more correct than the Bible because so many people criticize, people who follow the Bible pick it apart, right? Oh, well, we don't know about this, we don't know about that, this source, look at that source, all this sort of thing. Muslims do not say that kind of thing. At least, well, I'm sure some of them do, but most of them do not. They say, look, the reason our stuff is right is because it came straight from God, straight to us, and here it is. Okay? All right. Now, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the word Quran means recitation. Recitation, or to recite. That's really what it means. You can, instead of calling it the Quran, you could call it the recitation, the reciting. Because they're saying this is not Muhammad's ideas. This is not Muhammad's words. These are God's words through his prophet, through his messenger. So therefore, the Quran is a reciting of God's words. And in fact, the oral recitation of the Quran is at a premium. In other words, I told you they write it on an ostrich shell. I told you they write it all different ways. The way that it's most preferred, you got it all right here. You memorize the entire Quran, and then you recite it. And in fact, that happens. That happens often. There are usually men, older men, who have memorized the entire Quran, and they will come and announce they're going to recite the Quran, and people will gather around and listen to them recite the Quran. Okay? In fact, here's something else that'll probably be of interest or not, I don't know. I'll throw it out there anyway. People will bring their printed Quran while the guy is doing their reciting of the Quran, and you know what? They will alter their printed Quran to what he says, because he, I know, knows the Quran. He, I know, is a holy man, a man who's spiritual. So I trust him more than this printed page. The trusting of the oral word more than the written word is at the root of Islam, but it's also at the root of ancient culture. It's a very modern thing to want everything in print. It really is. Because people never had things in print. That's a very modern idea. Well, we got to have it written down. If I don't see it in writing, if I don't see it in writing, I don't believe it. If I don't see it in writing, I won't accept it. That's a very modern idea. Well, by modern I say like the last 500 years or so. For me, that's modern. The last 500 or 600 years, that's modern. If you get just a couple hundred years ago, that's just journalism. That's what I always say. So I don't tell the American historians I think what they're doing is mostly journalism. They haven't had enough time for perspective. They're too close to the subject. Well, I've argued with them before about that. Get a couple thousand years behind you, then go back and look at it with some objectivity. Or not. But that's what they do. Because, I have this printed Quran, but who printed it? Did they know what they were doing? What source did they use? Here's a man who has memorized the Quran, and now he's reciting it. I trust the man more than I trust the book. And if you think about it, that's the way it was with Muhammad. He recited it. That's the way it was first delivered. Well, anyway, however you want to look at it. You also see that in medieval society in Europe. They didn't trust written things. If Grandpa told you the property line is from that stump to this rock, and some guy comes with a piece of paper and says that's not right, who are you going to believe? The guy with a piece of paper that says your land is smaller? Or Grandpa, your dad, your grandpa, your great-grandpa says, no, that's always been our land. You're going to accept them. And that's what they did. In part because you can't read a piece of paper the guy brings anyway. Well, anyway, so the idea here, this is recitation. Now, the other thing I have to make sure I say is that Islam is based upon submission. That's what the word means. Submission, submitting. Islam. So if you are a Muslim, Muslim and Islam come from the same root. In Semitic languages, if you've studied any, studied Hebrew or whatever, you know that Semitic languages, the words form with 3 consonants. That forms the basis of most words. You take it the word, just in English, take a look at the word here. We won't count vowels. Okay? We'll count vowels. So we've got S, L, M. Right? Take a look at Muslim. S, L, M. Now it's preceded by an M. Muslim means one who is submitting. Actually, it's an active thing. One who is in the process of submission is a Muslim. Islam is submission to God. So a Muslim is somebody who's in the process of submitting to God. That makes sense? That's what they're saying. So, that's what it means. Okay. Now, Muhammad begins to preach this message in Mecca. For about 3 years he's out there doing that. He's not well received. Many people did not like his message. After 3 years, we can't be precise on the numbers, probably about 30 to 50 people is all that are following him. Most of those are his relatives, his wife, his cousins, his uncle. Okay? So he decides then in 622, and this is a very pivotal date in the history of Islam, 622, what would be AD 622 to us, will mark the beginning of the Muslim calendar. So if you take our calendar, you say, oh, okay, oh, that's good, okay. So let me see, if I open up my phone here, will it open? Yes, it opens. And I go to the calculator, and I put 2018, and I subtract 622, I get 1396. Now, it's not quite that simple, but you will see the dates in the 1300s. Now, why is it that simple? Well, maybe we'll have another talk about Islamic calendars and time in another day, but let me just say this, they are on a lunar calendar. And therefore, you have to use a little formula to sync up our kind of calendar with their kind of calendar. It's not a simple subtraction of 622 is what I'm saying. Okay? Because their year is actually a few days shorter than ours. It goes by a lunar calendar, and the lunar calendar is only 28 days. We have several months that have more than 28 days, right? So you can add that up. 11 months, yeah. Well, that's right. And by 1 day, or by 2 days, or by 4 days, 3 days. Mostly by 3 days, 2 or 3 days. So if you add that up, you're going to find, well, I could get you the formula later. We'll talk about that right now. But what that means is, this is what starts the calendar. In history, the thing that marks the beginning of your calendar is usually what people believe is the most important thing in their society, most important thing in their history. We're in the year 2018. 2018 of what? How did that calendar begin? The birth of Christ. The birth of Christ. Now some people say, well, maybe it was 3 BC. Some people say it was 6 BC. But the calendar itself was set to the birth of Christ. 2018 years since the birth of Christ. That's why our calendar says 2018. And we even signify that with the letters AD, right? What's AD? Anno Domini, yes. The year of our Lord, yes. Exactly. So the year of our Lord, 2018. Now, Some people don't like that because, you know, they're not Christians, and so they don't want to call Jesus Lord for whatever reason. And so they change it to CE. So you'll see this sometimes. CE, the Common Era. But guess what? They're still setting their calendar the same way, whether they want to call it that or not. So all our dates go forward from the birth of Christ, all our dates go backwards from the birth of Christ. For the ancient Greeks, you know how they set their calendar? Anybody remember? What's that?
I said, does it have to do with Apollo or something?
It has to do with the first Olympics. And all their dates go by the Olympiads. 776 BC, by our reckoning, would be the first Olympic Games. Then they had one every 4 years. Unlike we do now, we have them every 2 years. Of course, they just started that about 30 years ago. And we have a winter one and a summer one, and they do it every 2 years just so they can milk the money out of it more. That's my opinion.
Well, it makes sense. Because like
Makes sense to make money.
No, like if you're a winter athlete, like the gap that you can perform at your highest level is so small. So if it's every 8 years, like you're losing.
No, it's not every 8 years. What it used to be is you had the Winter and the Summer Olympics both in the same year. Every 4 years.
So it's kind of like 2 Olympics. I mean, in one.
Like by our standards, it's 2.
Well, it would be, yeah, of course the ancient people didn't have Winter Olympics. So, well, yeah, what would happen is, let's say if the Olympics were in 2018, you would do the Summer Olympic Games in July or August or whatever, and you do the Winter Olympic Games in December. Or you do the Winter Olympic Games in January and February, and you do the Summer Olympics in June and July. So you do them all within, say, 6 months. And they would do them in 2 different places, usually. Maybe they would pick a different spot for the Winter Olympics than the Summer Olympics. But they do it all in one calendar year.
I thought.
But then they began to divide it, I think probably around after the 80s, closer to 2000. Maybe 95, not 94, something like that. I don't know, somewhere in there, you can look. Late 80s, early 90s, they split it. Then they started doing it every 2 years. Do the Winter Olympics, and then you rotate it every 4. So they actually skipped one Winter Olympic, I think, to make that happen. In other words, they didn't have, well, anyway, you can look that all up. That's something very different. That is the setting of the Greek calendar. And then they would keep track of it. Since it's every 4 years, they could say, the 3rd year of the 8th Olympiad. You know exactly when it was. Well, we do the same kind of thing usually with presidential terms. We would say the 2nd year of the 2nd term of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's 2nd term, the 2nd year. That would be a very specific year. Or Truman, you know, the 3rd year of his 1st term. Stuff like that. So that's sort of how we would do it, but that's how the Greeks did it. The Romans did it to the founding of the city of Rome, 753 BC. So when the city of Rome was founded, that's when their calendar started. But for the Muslims, it begins here, in what would be 622 AD, by our reckoning, is their year 1. That's when Muhammad goes from Mecca to Medina, and then very shortly thereafter, he will gain a lot of followers in Medina. And by 630, about 8 years later, he will actually leave Medina with a force, an army, to raid Mecca and subdue it with force. So this can tell us several things. One thing is this: we tend to think of religious leaders as religious leaders, and they should do religious things. Muhammad is not just he is a religious leader. He's not just a religious leader. He is also a military leader. He is also a political leader. And he's starting what we might say an empire as well as a religion. Therefore, he leads troops. He makes decisions like a judge. He rules things in ways that we would not see, for example, Jesus in that role at all. Okay? So that's what we have to remember. And also it lets us know that the use of force to advance the cause was there from the beginning. And a lot of that's coming right out of Bedouin ideas about the raid. We talked about the raid. Now here is a map that shows us what happens after the death of Muhammad, when Muhammad dies. You can see that Islam spreads, that sort of tan area there, a tan area of Arabia. This is where Islam begins. Mecca, Medina. By the way, Medina was also called Yatrib. Y-A-T-R-I-B, Yatrib. It takes on the name Medina because in Arabic the name Medina means city, and what the full name of it is, City of the Prophet. Because this is where the Prophet's message was really accepted and where it began. And by the way, while Mecca was pagan, the Muslims prayed in the direction of Jerusalem. And Muhammad tried very hard to get the Jews to accept him, which most of them did not. So then when Mecca was taken, the prayer was moved to Mecca because, that was the place where the stone of Allah, the black stone, was. But they aren't going to pray that way because of the pagan things that are there. So you see that tan area. Then you see this sort of purpley area here. This is the Persian or Sasanian Empire. And then you see this area would have been Byzantine, where Egypt and Syria is. Here's the Byzantines up here in the green. And a lot of this North Africa here, some of it would have been Byzantine, some of it would have been more independent. But they sweep across north. They take the Persian Empire. They take this part of the Byzantine Empire, Damascus, Jerusalem, Alexandria, and so forth. And they keep moving outward. They keep moving outward. And they go all the way to Spain. They go all the way to France. They go all the way to Afghanistan. You see how far afield they go. And they do this in about 100 years. 100 years from the death of Muhammad to this huge expansion. And if you ask a Muslim, how could that have happened? They're going to say, because of God. This shows that God was with us. That's why we expanded so quickly. Now, this expansion is going to bring about, obviously, a lot more territory under their control, but new challenges. Because before, everything had been in Arabia, pretty much everything was dealing with Arabs. Now they're going to have to deal with Persians. They're going to have to deal with Greeks. They're going to have to deal with Berbers. They're going to have to deal with, lots of other people and lots of other languages and a much wider geographic scope. So that then brings about new challenges, and we will continue this, I guess, on Monday, unless I decide to record more and put it up there. All right, have a good weekend. I hope I see you on Friday night.